Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 76 of my comic review video day calendar. Once again, still a little behind on this. I'm going to try to get caught up. First of all, we're going to take a look at Secret Origins number 44. It actually took me kind of a minute to figure out what number this was. Look how tiny the number is on the corner of this. Like, you almost need a magnifying glass, and you got to make sure and get it under just the right light. Look at that. Look how difficult that is to see. It's really strange. So this is Secret Origins featuring Batman versus the Mud Pack. I've had this in my possession for a little while, was never really sure what this was about. Didn't take a real close look at it to realize that these are all Clayfaces. And I feel like the cover isn't really advertising this correctly. It's not marketing it right, because what it really should say is Batman versus like all the Clayfaces, or Clayface 1 through 4, or Mud Pack, aka the Clayfaces. Like, I assume this is some weird, not thinking about it too hard, just taking a look at this cover. I'm just saying this cover doesn't immediately make me want to read this book. It's a nice cover. I especially like the rendering of that version of the Batsuit. It feels almost like an 89 suit mixed with a Batman 66 suit. Like, it's cool. And by the way, this is right around the same time as the 89 movie comes out. This is September of 89, and that movie comes out in the summer, of course, June or July. I think that was a June release. I forget. I'd have to go back and look. And usually, as I've talked about before, the dates are 2 or 3 months after they actually come out. So if this says September, it probably actually comes out more or less in conjunction with the release of the movie. Not that this has anything to do with that, but I just bring that up to say Batman's real popular right then, and this particular version of the bat symbol on the chest is, of course, pretty popular at the moment. But I'm really glad that I finally looked at this, because it's really educational, and I would recommend this if you're a Clayface fan, and if you have any interest in learning more about the various versions of Clayface, because as a lot of you guys are aware, I'm sure, there are not one but many Clayfaces. We're in just 1989. This was obviously 30 plus years ago, and we already have a fourth version of Clayface being introduced here. If this isn't her first appearance, it is certainly introducing her as if it is. Maybe she pops in somewhere right before this. But anyway, this is, I don't know how many more Clayfaces we've had after this, but the couple of Clayfaces that you might be familiar with, the Matt Hagen Clayface is the one that I grew up with because of the animated series, but he's actually a blend of the first two Clayfaces, and we get their origins broken down here in a really good kind of comparison, a real good understanding of the differences between those two characters. So the first Clayface is Basil Karlo, who is a out of work actor who is kind of past his prime. He was a horror actor. Famously, he stars in The Terror, not to be confused with the Tick villain, The Terror, and that comes back in the Arkham series. I think Arkham City or Arkham Knight 1, you can find, I think it's Arkham City, you can find a poster of the Terror, and his origin here is retold from his 1940 or 1941 origin. Clayface goes back that far, and I'm jumping around, but I kind of wonder. I've talked about this year already. Here in Bat March, I'm wondering if Falseface in the 60s show actually was supposed to be Clayface, and they just called him Falseface instead because they came up with the mask gimmick instead of it being a clay gimmick where he could change his face with his hands. And then the Batman 66 comic made Falseface into Clayface, which I always thought was really creative, but I never looked at this origin before. Like I said, real educational, and it seems very Falseface to me. So anyway, so you've got Basil Karlo, who is upset that they're remaking The Terror. It's kind of some fun satire about Hollywood, and already this early in 89, and then even in the 40s, because I assume it's the same in that story. I've not read that, but already some satire about Hollywood not going to enough original ideas, and actors being upset that their work is being kind of covered up, kind of paved over by new versions of their material, and wasn't it good in the first place? And it's about legacy, and you can kind of understand why he would be upset, even if you're not. He is a little bit sympathetic, even though he reads like a somewhat one-dimensional villain. You just kind of got to roll a d20 and come up with some kind of a a method, some kind of a motivation, excuse me, that makes sense with his motif. But he doesn't have any kind of superpowers. He just is able to put this mud on his face and change what his face looks like. It's a real kind of Dick Tracy sort of pulp kind of motif for a supervillain, an ability that he has. And then you start getting into more of the super science when you get into the second Clayface with Matt Hagen. And like I said, the animated series just takes these two characters and puts them together. And I always thought that was a smart call, because that show likes to have sympathetic villains as much as humanly possible. And if you go to the actor origin instead of this origin, which is very kind of intentionally silly, and I enjoyed it. It's fun. It's almost like a newspaper strip, like comedy strip. Especially the way it's drawn by a guy calling himself Bem89. I guess that's kind of his pen name. But Bem89 is actually Bernie Meerwalt. And I couldn't find, he doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. I couldn't even find any other credits for him besides this. And the only thing I immediately found for him, I didn't look a real long time or anything, was, believe it or not, I'll show you this real quick. Again, I'm jumping all over the place, excuse me. But I found an auction where the original page that you're looking at right now was sold. That's the only thing I was able to find for him. Let me open this up so you can see it. Isn't that crazy? So I don't know who this guy is and what else he might have done. But anyway, so the second Clayface's origin is he, just for folks that aren't aware of these, and then I'll get to a little bit more detail with some of these stories. This is, by the way, kind of a vignette piece where we've got a sort of framing device of sorts. There's a little bit of connectivity between each of these origins, just kind of real loose, thinly veiled. Somebody is telling somebody else in each of these the story of how each of these Clayfaces came to be, and it's a different person each time. But I guess the one thing that kind of connects them all together is the whole mud pack thing. So the first story is the female Clayface, Clayface 4, coming in and wanting to meet the original Clayface and expecting to be inspired by that meeting, and that he'll be, as she calls it, a big deal. And then she turns out to not be real impressed with him at all, and he offers to come help be part of her team, and she's not interested in that, and she leaves, and you get the real typical "you've not seen the last of me" speech. And so I assume that Basil Carlo probably does indeed show up after this, and I would be curious to see the story that this is setting up. This says right on the cover, the story continues in Detective 604, and this is a prologue before it's anything. All it's really establishing is her and then some sort of mysterious figure at the end of the second story. So again, those are the things that really kind of connect all of this together. And then in the third one, it's the third Clayface just sort of talking to himself. But anyway, so we talked about the origin for the Basil Carlo Clayface, the out-of-work actor who's angry that they're remaking his movie. And then the second one is Matt Hagen, who is a kind of low-life, smarmy thief who is looking for buried treasure, of all things, and he is looking for any kind of get-rich-quick scheme he says he's the power that he gets is perfect for a hold up man. That's how he thinks of himself. So he goes into banks and stores and just pulls guns on people and steals stuff. And while he's going for this buried treasure, he finds, pardon me, this weird pot that gives him, it's real contrived. Handled way better in Batman the Animated Series. And again, this is a retelling of the original story, but he gets this some kind of substance that I don't know if it's mystical or what. He opens it up sort of like a genie lamp, but instead of a genie, it's this clay stuff that changes him. And then we have this real fun, absurd scene where he's walking around without a head and trying to figure out how he's still able to think. And he keeps talking about how interesting it is to be able to continue living without a brain and without a head. He says, I think, therefore I am, and then he puts himself back together, and it has a whole lot of fun with it, certainly. At one point, he tries to kill himself because he's like, he's very shallow and intentionally so, and he essentially says, if I can't get laid, what is the point of living? And he tries to blow his own brains out, and it doesn't work out. He just has goopy head everywhere, and he goes, oh, this is good. This will actually be really great as a hold-up man. And then sort of like the Venom symbiote, and it works the same way in the cartoon show, he's able to make himself, the clay, look like his original face and go around like a normal person. And then ultimately, he finds out that Batman ends up luring him, maybe somewhat accidentally, into a kiln, and he bakes himself. And so Batman thinks that he's dead, and he's kind of horrified by it. And I love this line that Batman has right before this happens, by the way, where he says, where is it? He says, oh no, it's Gordon who says he was playing a dangerous game. Yeah, he walked into a kiln and he baked himself. And then I don't understand how this works, but basically the idea is he can break out of the baked clay, and then he looks like his normal self again. And I thought maybe it was the human being coming out of it, but then he still has his powers and he is able to do this again. So I don't know why he looks human when he comes out of that. It's comic book nonsense, but it's a lot of fun. I enjoyed this one a lot. And then, like I said, there's this villain at the end that is watching him. That is going to also be connected to, and I don't know who this is, who's also going to be connected to this detective storyline, which goes from 04 to 07. And like I said, the whole point of this is just, we're going to do this big Clayface story with all these characters. You might not know their origins. You might have no idea where they come from and what they're about. So the whole point of Secret Origins is just educating you about where these characters come from. And I want to read more. I have several of these, but I haven't read very many. I want to read more of this book because I'm sure I'll have a much better understanding of Silver and Golden Age, old school origins. I don't know how much of this is retelling and how much of it is giving origins for characters that didn't have them in the first place. But something else that's kind of interesting about this is there's every chance here to completely reinvent these characters because we are post-crisis, post-crisis at this point. I mean, John Byrne's Superman's been going on for a long time. Miller's already been on Batman, and you can see that because the art in the first issue is clearly heavily influenced by Miller, and that one is drawn by Keith Griffin, who wasn't a name that I immediately recognized, but I realized that, like a lot of these guys, I have had experiences with him before and just didn't realize it. He is the co-creator of Lobo. Maybe we've talked about him before, I forget. But I didn't realize he also created Ambush Bug, and he has been working all the way up until recently, just a few years ago, if he's not working right now. He's in his 70s. I think he is 70. And but anyway, he worked on Scooby Apocalypse, so that's just a few years ago. But anyway, his art in this, I'm everywhere, but I'll mention this real quick, and then I'll go to the third one. This one written by Mike W. Barr, who wrote, among lots of other things, Batman Year 2, which I keep singing its praises and I keep wanting to review, but I've talked about recently, haven't done a full-on review of. I don't think I've talked. I've been talking about that book so much lately. I feel like I've reviewed it, but I don't think I straight up have. I must be conflating it with the last time I talked about Mask of the Phantasm, because that movie seemed to be, and there's some contention about whether it is or not, but that movie seems to be influenced some by the Reaper, who he creates for that story, who is something of a phantasm-like character, and I'm not 100% sure how true that actually is now, but yeah, I thought I reviewed it. I haven't yet, so we've been talking about maybe doing that this month. I don't know if we'll get to it, but anyway, so that's Mike W. Barr, Keith Griffin with the pencils. This is a really interesting art style. It is the most kind of blatant 80s gritty Miller-esque stuff in the book. These really exaggerated kind of, and like I can even see a little bit of like before animated series Batman kind of style in this too. Not saying that Bruce Timm was necessarily directly influenced by this art style, but it does remind me of that a little bit, where it's just it's simpler, it's angular. I guess what I'm saying is this kind of looks like a cartoon show, but it is very. I keep saying Dick Tracy. It's very 40s pulp, and that is, I think, appropriate because of the period that this original story came out in, and the writing is also very 40s. It's kind of interesting how I've talked about this with some other comics this month as well, but this is another one of those examples where there's kind of an anachronism between the style of writing and the art style, where this feels like a kind of brighter, more chipper story, at least the ways that all the characters are talking. Like, there's an exclamation point at the end of almost every line. Robin has a lot of kind of silly one-liners. There's supposed to be this juxtaposition between them where Batman takes everything really seriously, and Dick Grayson is super lighthearted and is this naive kid who almost doesn't even recognize that there's any danger, what could possibly go wrong. But there's also some blood in this, and we've got a murderer who is in Basil Carlo, who not only is killing, and this is a fun plot, not only killing each of the actors in the order that they die in the story, so reflecting, it's kind of like life imitating art. He's a serial killer originally in his movie, and now he has tragically degenerated into that character because of his jealousy and because of his pride. And so he turns into that guy, and he's killing everyone in the order that they die in the movie, and he also kills this mob thug guy who is there and has figured out what he's doing. And so there is quite a bit of violence here, as you see there. And like I said, just very inspired art-wise. Like, the art is very 80s, and the writing is very 40s, is what I'm getting at. You've got a Batman who's got the very short ears. He has almost a straight-up, I keep saying Miller, but Dark Knight Returns specifically, bat symbol in the middle of his chest. It's bright yellow. There's not a circle around it. You didn't have that in the 40s, of course, and it sort of looks like, I would argue, what Robin might have been drawn like if it was Dick Grayson instead of Carrie Kelly in Dark Knight Returns. So that's really interesting. And another point I want to make about this, just in general, is I like that each of these stories is in kind of a different genre. So if you read this in one sitting, you get these different vignettes and different styles, sort of like, I always go to these, but sort of like the anime vignette movies, like the Matrix one, Animatrix, or the Batman one that came out after Dark Knight. That's not great, but where each of them is done by a different creative team, and the styles are different. They're evoking different emotions, and I think that's really cool because each of the different Clayfaces has a very different motivation and a very different attitude about things. So the first story is gritty pulp crime drama, and it's a whodunit story, and it's a serial killer thing. And then your second story is a kind of dark comedy, and and each of these also feels like it's reflecting a certain print style as much as anything. So you've got sort of like a EC crime thing going on with that first story, and then this one looks like newspaper strip comedies, like I mentioned. I should break down the creative team here too, and I will in a second. But then that third story is, which we haven't talked about at all, with Clayface 3, who is Preston Preston. Preston Payne. I always forget that one. This story, I should say, is more of a kind of classic, and again, still pulp, still maybe EC like, but more of a horror thing, more of a monster story. And so anyway, let me backtrack real quick and give you the credits for the second story. This one is written by Dan Raspler, who is an editor before he's anything. He did win an Eisner Award for editing several books, including Kingdom Come and Hitman, which we've talked about once in Not Spawn Year. He created Young Heroes in Love, and he wrote not very much, but he's mostly known for editing. And then this third story is written by the great Len Wein. So cool to have a big major player there. I love Len Wein. This is an odd story, I should say, but it's fun. And then you have Tom Grummett, Grummett, who drew. And I like his art style a lot. It's very recognizable to me because he drew on a lot of the things that I was reading in the early 90s. He's in a lot of the major heavy-hitting events like Death of Superman, like Nightfall. He worked on what is that storyline I'm looking for it again? Panic in the Sky from Superman, Lonely Place of Dying he drew on. So anyway, just there's some credits real quick. This third story is fun because, and I didn't know anything about this particular Clayface. The third Clayface, and I'm not sure what era he starts in, I would have to look that up, but he is a guy who's born with a horrible disorder where he is defective. He's he's disfigured from birth, and I mean, I don't think he's drawn to look that disfigured. He kind of just has a big forehead. Like, he's not even as strange looking as the leader or anything. But I guess kids can be mean and superficial, and he doesn't look like a pretty boy that belongs on the CW, so nobody pays him any mind. And he realizes that Clayface might have the second Clayface, Matt Hagen. So there's some connective tissue between these two stories. Might have the cure. Might have a way for him to lead a normal life, and he, in a somewhat convoluted way, convinces Hagen to give him some of his blood so that he can do research on it and see if he can give himself the same thing that Clayface has so that he can change his face. And it ultimately works, but as you might expect, not for very long. And I think this might also be influencing the animated series story a little bit, because that Clayface is not able to hold himself together for very long, and that's exactly what happens here, where for a while, this guy goes on a date. He's like, I never thought that a woman would be attracted to me and I would have a chance with her. He goes out with this beautiful girl, and then he becomes this hideous monster where his face is running like clay. I like that each of these guys has, even when one is connected to one of the others, they have a totally different power set or ability or way that the clay works in with their motif. and he freaks out, and it's very much a kind of Phantom of the Opera sort of situation. He's even wearing a cape, and then he puts on a Mr. Freeze type suit to be able to hold himself together. And so he's a more tragic character than Matt Hagen in that now he's barely even functioning, and he's not able to really shapeshift. So he's got the clay face all the time. And the story itself is weird because it's shorter, and it just kind of recaps the origin real quick. The other two feel more like stories while you're in them, and then so at first, the reason he starts telling the story is because he is upset that the TV gets his origin wrong. So he's watching a documentary that says, we don't have very much information about this guy. And he's like, what are you talking about? It was well documented, and I can tell you everything. Just come talk to me. And then he just kind of talks to himself. He's talking to a mannequin that reminds him of the girl that he was trying to date, I think. And he seems to think she's real, and he's delusional, and he's the most crazy of the three. He's the most Arkham inmate-esque of these. And at the end, we find out that there never even was a documentary, and that he was just looking at static. And that's kind of a strange choice, that he is motivated to tell his story by a thing he's not even seeing. So he has this complete break with reality. It's kind of odd. It's kind of a strange choice. But yeah, I would certainly recommend this to educate yourself about the Clayfaces. And my only real complaint about it is that this cover would not have ever compelled me to read it, and it's hard to tell what the number is. Thanks a lot for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back hopefully today with another one because I'm behind, but we will catch up. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.